Today's video is going to discuss the materials required to complete your worksheets for this class. We'll be discussing the required materials that you need, the ones that are essential for completing it. We will discuss the supplemental materials that may enhance some of your projects that are optional. And then we'll also discuss how to use some of these materials in the most effective way if some of these are new to you. The first material that you'll need, you absolutely have to have in order to make it in this class, is of course a printout of your worksheets. So these are all the ones that we have. If you don't want to print them out in color, you can just print them out in black and white. Each page corresponds to an element or a principle of art. When you're printing these out, you can print them on plain computer paper, but if you want to have a little bit easier time with some of your, especially colored pencils, or if you start to do any watercolor work, you may, or marker work as well, you may decide that you want to print this out on a little bit heavier weight paper. I have chosen to print mine out on a little bit heavier weight cardstock than the typical printer paper. And that's just going to help combat any bleeding or tearing of the paper that you might see, especially if I start to apply some wet media. So we will discuss both the extra materials and then some of your essential materials for this class. So things you must have for this. Some of these, it doesn't really matter the level that you get. Like if you need a piece of tape, it can be any kind of tape. Or if you need glue, it can be a glue stick, it can be a glue pen, it can be a glue bottle. And then you'll need some sort of ruler or straight edge. Again, it doesn't really matter as long as it helps you to draw straight lines. And you will definitely need a pair of scissors throughout this class. Any of these things, as long as they do your job, you don't have to worry about buying something special or something that's a high quality. As long as it does the job, it's totally fine. Another thing right there would also be your pencil sharpener as well. Usually pencil sharpeners, the more expensive ones versus the cheap ones, is not really as much how sharp they are to start off with, but more about how quickly they wear out. So a more expensive pencil sharpener will last longer for you than a cheaper one. But if you have a new one and it's only like 50 cents, it's going to be fine for the course of this class. What you'll notice that you'll get into trouble with is if your pencil sharpener has gotten dull. That's where it's going to start breaking off your tips before you ever get to a sharp tip. So pencil sharpener as well. You'll need an eraser for this class. I don't recommend any pink erasers. They can leave pink streaks on your paper. So if you want an eraser, you can have a vinyl one. I think vinyl erasers are very good for erasing the darkest marks on your paper, so they're very strong. Then there's also the kneaded eraser. This is probably my favorite eraser for graphite. When it comes in a little package, and then you can shape it into any shape that you see fit. You can pull it apart. And anytime your kneaded eraser needs to be cleaned, this is how you clean it. You clean it by kneading it yourself. And that's how you clean a kneaded eraser. Whereas if you're cleaning something like a vinyl eraser, you'll have to rub it onto a piece of scratch paper before you actually start using it, or else you will transfer your graphite streaks. And then the last kind that is often sold in art supply stores is the gum eraser. It's not my particular favorite eraser. It's not as strong as some of the other ones, and it does tend to be a little bit crumbly, so it's not my preferred. But if it comes in a packet with your stuff, if you got like a pencil pack that also had an eraser in it, it will work. It will do the job. It's just a little bit dustier than some of your other erasers. So I'll put those to the side. Then one other thing you're going to need for this class is you're going to need some sort of black marker / pen. You will be doing both fine outlines, so you need something with a fine tip to it, but you will also be filling in large areas of color with black ink, so you will need something that also has a broad tip. You can buy, a black marker and just use a black pen, or my preference is these Tombow markers because they are water-based. So they don't have a strong smell to them, unlike something like a Sharpie. They're also a lot truer color than something that's a Sharpie. Sharpies are not like archival quality markers, so I recommend getting something that's a little bit more elevated than a Sharpie. You will find one that your nose and your brain will thank you for not using a Sharpie all the time. And two, you're going to just have a much smoother coloring experience when you compare something like a Tombow marker to a Sharpie. Now, when discussing graphite, there is some major things that's going to help you for this class. One is that the lead in a graphite pencil is not just pure graphite. It is a mixture of graphite and clay. The more clay that you have in your pencil, the lighter of a stroke that you're going to have, and the more that your pencil is going to retain its sharpness. Whereas when you have more graphite in the pencil, the line is going to appear greasier, it's going to appear smudgier, and it's going to appear darker. So in a range of pencils, it goes from 9H, 8H, 7H, all the way to 2H, and then HB. And then it starts to go in the opposite direction. So then from HB, and those are getting increasingly darker. And then if you want to keep on getting darker than that, in the B range, it's going to start off with 2B, 3B, 4B, 5B, 6B, 7B, 8B, all the way to 9B, where your 9B has the most graphite in it of any pencil. It's a much higher concentration. And your 9H right there, so your 9B, the most graphite, your 9H, the most clay. And so these are going to have drastically different marks that they make. For your requirements, you need one pencil with a number and an H, you need one pencil with a number and a B, and then you need one HB pencil. You can find these in kits. You can buy them individually as well. The HB pencil is also known as your number 2 pencil because it's considered to be a standard, being an ideal mixture between clay and graphite. So I'm going to demonstrate for you now how that ratio of clay to graphite affects the way that your pencil is going to make marks. And so what that demonstration does is, yes, it shows you how quickly or how significant a change is within the same pencils. It's just a combination of graphite and clay, so it's the same material, but the ratio really changes the character. You can also tell how quickly these points wear down when they are softer than the points that are much harder, the H points. You can see how much they retain their shape and will need much less sharpening as they go on. So you're going to need those, one H range pencil, one from this section, your HB pencil, and then one pencil from the Bs. If you have more than that, that's great, but you really only need 3 to complete these worksheets. For this worksheet, you really only need 4 pencils. You need your 3 primaries and a black. You can make your whole range of colors just by using those 4, and you will have pretty good results as long as your pencils are of a superior quality. This is probably, of all of the materials that I am recommending in this class, your money is best spent in getting good colored pencils. You will notice a difference if you buy cheap pencils. So I will talk about what I recommend. You may wind up getting a pack of pencils, and in that pack you may find that you may have 2 reds that are kind of similar to one another. What I want you to choose the red that is the most true to primary. So if there's one that's a little bit orange, if there's one that's a little bit purple, select the one that is the truest to primary red. The same goes with the blue and the yellow. If you have a choice in your pack, try and avoid the ones that are a little bit orangey. If it's red, any yellows that are on the green side, any blues that are either very teal or a little bit too purple, because when you are mixing colors, if your primaries are not true primaries, your colors are going to wind up muddy. The fifth pencil that I really do highly recommend for this class is I do recommend you get a blender. They're not terribly expensive to get a blender pencil, but they are going to make a significant difference in the quality of the work that you turn in, the amount of time that you spend working on it to achieve your grade, and it's just going to create a better visual experience for you. I'm going to demonstrate for you right now what happens when you use just the cheapest 97-cent pack of colored pencils, the results that you're going to get. I'm going to show you what happens when you use a little bit better pencils, and then I'll also show you as a final example what happens when you use a blender pencil, or you can even use alcohol wipes as well. Those will also work, but they are kind of an individual use. So those little disinfectant alcohol pads that you get right before you get a shot, you can use those instead of a blender pencil. But a blender pencil is going to give you the greatest degree of control. Now, just a couple things to keep in mind when you are using colored pencil is always use the side rather than point when coloring in. If you try and color in a whole area and you're just using the point, you're going to have a lot streakier texture than if you use the side of your lead. That's a big help as well. So let me demonstrate a couple different degrees of completion for you. So now you can see when you compare these guys that this one has a lot less pigment in it, so the color's a lot less rich. Just by switching to a little bit nicer pencil, I have a richer, deeper pigment in my coloring. And then when I add that blender, and you can see how nice and smooth and solid that becomes. You can also tell I was changing directions, going at 45-degree angles different times. That also will help with smoothing out your texture. So that is a demonstration of why you need to have at least a scholar level pencil. So that's Prismacolor Scholar. Blick Studio also makes a scholar level pencil. And you'll have even better and faster and more rich results if you were to buy an artist grade like Prismacolor Premier or Crayon Dash or Faber-Castell. So those higher end pencils, the better your pencil is, the smoother and better looking your work is going to appear. And the Prismacolor Scholar pencils are only like $5 for a large pack, or for like a 12 pack. So they're not that expensive, $5 or $6 for a pack. That's not too bad for being able to have a much higher quality level of work turned in. That's what's going to guarantee you, as long as you're putting in effort in other aspects, you know, that's going to guarantee you get those A's in your craftsmanship scores. And then I'm going to give you just a few other helpful hints and tips for coloring with your colored pencils, because there are certain ways it's going to make it easier, especially when you get to your color wheel into blending, than others are. So the number one tip is that your pigments are not all the same strength. Some pigments are going to overpower others, especially your black. Black, definitely the strongest. If you ever are adding black in order to darken something down, you really only add a tiny bit. But the order of strength of pigments is going to be your yellow pigment is your weakest. So you're going to need to use the most of your yellow pencil. Your red is your next strongest, and then your blue is your strongest pigment color. So if you're not careful, when you go to make green by mixing yellow and blue, you can wind up with a very blue-green before you're ready for it to be. You want it to be an even mix, but so making an even mix is not equal parts because you need more yellow because your yellow is not as strong. We'll show a demonstration. So you can see here how very blue that is. I want something, if I was trying to do a true green, this is more of a blue-green, I'm gonna have to use less blue. And that produces a much less blue-green. So you can see that by lessening the amount of blue, that I will produce a better green. The same can be done when you're doing purple, when you're doing orange as well. You gotta pay attention to how much strength is in each individual pigment, which is why I recommend before you actually jump into your project pages, do a little practice on a scrap sheet of paper before you start. I'm also going to show you the difference between, like, let's just do a purple, between a purple made with true red and true blue versus a purple made with like sort of an orangey red and a greenish blue, and how different, why it really matters that you try and pick the most true primary color that you can. So you can see right here that even if the quality of pencil is a high quality one, in the case of this one with the scarlet red and the light blue, the red is so orange and the blue is like has enough green in it that the result is very brown. It looks very muddy, as opposed to when you're using that true red and that true blue. When those blend together, it produces a much closer result to true purple when you're doing your layering than if you had if you use colors that aren't close to their true primary color. So a much truer purple right here than in this case. Now let's talk about some of the optional materials that you might be using in this class. So we'll start off with some colored pens and markers. These are not required. You can just use your colored pencils for any of your projects that require color in them, but some of them you may find yourself wanting to have a little bit more personal expression, so you can use some of those. And I'll talk about some options that work really well for these worksheets. We'll look at some of your options in markers beyond just your black one that is required. You may want something that writes a little bit more fine. I really enjoy the Le Pen line because it dries so fast, it prevents smudging on any work. And I enjoy having the option to have a very super fine line as opposed to the thick and the thin sides, which are good, but this one's just super fine right there. And that's great, especially for your pattern project, to have a little bit thicker option. Le Pen also comes in a variety of other colors as well. They'll make that same sort of mark on your paper. Quite a fine line right there. So colored pens are always an option, and again, the brand doesn't really matter as long as it works well. It's not chunky, it's not clumped up, it's not giving you uneven streaks in any kind of way. And then there are also a variety of colors in Tombow markers, so you can have some fun with that without going to terribly great expense. These sets are usually around like $18 to $20 for a set, and they do also blend really well. Just note that your blender may get stained over time, but as long as you're kind of cleaning it out on a scrap piece of paper in between your blending, you shouldn't really have a problem with utilizing it. So even as it gets stained, just remember, like your blender pencil, you need to clean it off in between changing out colors. So. Now this is something that you can only do if you are using a higher quality paper. If you try and do this on printer paper, you're going to have a lot of issues. It's not going to go exactly the way that you planned. So it does have to be on nicer paper. You'll tear up your paper if you try and blend, especially Tombows or things like that. Anything water-based material, you're going to have trouble blending it unless you print out on nicer quality paper. And the last thing I want to discuss is going to be watercolor pencils. And it's a very easy way to get some wet media into your work without investing a whole bunch of money into something and that's just going to be used for 1 or 2 pages in this project, although you can of course use these throughout the rest of your lifetime if you so desire. But it also doesn't involve spending a lot of money on extra materials. You may already even have some of these. So I'll demonstrate a couple of techniques that you can use with watercolor pencils. The first, of course, is you can just draw like you would with a pencil and then add water to it afterwards. You can use a scrap piece of paper and kind of knock off a chunk of material and then use that to kind of pick up with a wet brush and then go onto a wash with other places. Or you can lift material directly from your pencil point with a wet brush. Another great thing with watercolor pencils is if you use any wax resist, or I've even found some pretty good luck with a white wax colored pencil. So just the wax in your colored pencil will help to resist in certain areas, so that if you do a wash but you want to leave some areas white, if you color them in with your white pencil, you'll find that you can you'll have an area that the water won't color into the paper. And again, this, just like those Tombows, really needs to be on higher quality paper. For watercolors, I recommend watercolor paper. So if you needed to just do your project, this one section of one project on a square of watercolor paper, and then tape it or glue it down to the larger sheet, you could do that. So you don't have to do it directly on that sheet of lower quality printer paper. Of course, the more water you add, the less distinct your line is going to be, the more it's going to turn into a watercolor painting. You can then use these as a little palette to pick up color and then put it somewhere else. See that block where the white was. Now, it's not as strong as if you were using something like, let's say, liquid frisket, but it does help to create that little bit of resistance and allow you to come back and pull off the color. Alright, and those are the materials that you will need in order to complete this class. You will need your printed out worksheet, you'll need some sort of straight edge or ruler, you're going to need your scissors, an eraser, a piece of tape, a pencil sharpener of some sort, you'll need a black marker and a pen. Some of them that are dual-ended will give you that all in one go. You'll need 3 graphite pencils, one with an H range, one of an HB, and one in the B range. And then you're going to need, at the minimum, in Prismacolor Scholar or Blick Scholar or higher level of colored pencil, you'll need a red, a yellow, a blue, and then you'll also need a black as well. If you have those materials, you will have success in this class, and then you can supplement them with any of the others beyond that.